Right. So, two very different presentations, which is always good, I think, because it means that it gets your brain really, really working. So while you're kind of letting what Sarah and Paul have talked about kind of just bed in a bit, and there'll be an opportunity, hopefully, at the end to pose some questions about some of what you've heard. We'll move on to the third element of the session. Chris Boardman, I'm proud to say he's my colleague. Something I say quite a lot, because I'm a big fan of ITV4 in the summer for 2 weeks. So, Chris, you're now you're the leader of Active Travel England. What is Active Travel England, and what's your vision for it?
Good morning. Yeah, it's fascinating to. It's actually really great to not be at an active travel summit or decarbonisation or where you just go and talk to the same people. It's great to actually go out and connect with people who actually have to make all of that stuff happen. And I'll give you a bit of background. I don't know if everybody knows, but I was the Transport Commissioner for Greater Manchester for Andy Burnham for the last 4.5 years. So I started with active travel, and then I got into trains and delaminating concrete and unions and everything that stitches it together. And that's probably the point. I'll get there in a minute, Anthony. That's probably the point where I realised or started to interact with technology and what it means, because I started with an outcome of what do we want the places we live to be like? What do we want that to be for our families and our kids? And then what do we need to get people there? And easy is the first word. It's got to be easy. For a lot of the reasons that were just touched upon, the blockers are so frighteningly small sometimes between choosing doing that and doing that. So what's easy? And you realise, well, actually, I want somebody to be able to have an app or a card, and they tap it on a bike, and they tap it on a tram or a train, and it's capped at £10 for the day. And we started to develop what that needed to look like and how technology was going to be what stitched it all together. So Greater Manchester, my work there was essentially, in fact, the paper that we produced for this integrated plan was actually called Change a Region to Change a Nation, and that was the point. And that's how I ended up as Anthony's colleague, seeing if we can scale that up for a country, specifically on active travel. I think we all know that we've got to change. You know, we've got these massive problems that we don't talk about. We've got health, we've got obviously the climate crisis, at the moment cost of living. All of our major problems can be positively impacted if people feel able to get around on bike or on foot. But we're only going to do that if it's easy. And so that's how I got embedded into this. And the Active Travel England is the vehicle that's going to have to deliver it. It's an inspectorate, so one of the things that we need for easy is, or the thing we need for easy is connected safe space, all the way from where I am to where I want to go. And that includes the junctions, it includes everything. Because if we can't look out of a car window and say, oh, I quite fancy that, or yeah, go on, then you can go to school on your own, then it's a waste of public money. So Active Travel England will ensure that everything that's funded is to that standard. But I think most excitingly, it's also there to help local councils. In fact, we already have in our fledgling startup form over the last 3 months, when we were allocating funds, some of which were announced, 200 million of which were announced last weekend. We went to councils and said, show us your plans, because it now has to meet these standards. You haven't got a plan. Do you want us to help you? In fact, in some cases, do you want us to do it for you? And that's a whole new place to be, I think, probably for the department, actually, a body that can actively go and help councils win bids. And that is, it's a wonderful thing to be involved in. It's also going to be a statutory consultee to make sure everything we build in the future enables people to get around under their own steam, makes people feel comfortable enough to let their kids get to school on their own. And that's 12% of morning traffic. So, and I think that's what Active Travel England has to deliver. It's an essential part of dealing with so many of our problems. And of course, the cost of living at the moment, well, You know, if you need to save me, imagine if you could have a family that didn't have 3 cars, had 2 cars, because I can actually use an electric bike and the kids are able to get to school on their own. I know they can. So it's so integrated. And I'll stop rambling now, Anthony. I think I've covered most of the salient points there.
Chris, as you can tell, now hangs out with politicians quite a lot because he does that thing of answering his own question. So I'll just say, what is the price of fish, Chris? Over to you. And he'll... Anyway, you go around Europe quite a lot. You've seen lots of cities trying to do things that you'd like to see happen here on Active Travel. Can you give us some examples of the sorts of things you've seen that you think we should be doing differently?
Well, I mean, I pause because we use an example of Copenhagen, and we talk about Denmark and Holland, and I'm sick of talking about those places because it doesn't resonate, it doesn't connect. A big part, most of my job is communication and how to frame it in the way people get it. But 60%, I actually just checked it out actually. So Amsterdam's 408 miles from where we're sitting now, same climate. 60% of kids get to school under their own steam, largely riding bikes, because riding bikes is just lazy walking everywhere else. And they do that every day. And that's just normal. 408 miles from here. That's just normal. And if we ask the question, wouldn't you want that for your kids? I think we'd all go, yeah, I would, yeah. Wouldn't you like your family and yourselves to have a choice? Because cars are great, I absolutely love cars, but because they're great, we use them for too much stuff. And so we've lost the capacity to do other things. So 408 miles from here, there are examples, but we need to have examples here in the UK that work. And there's pockets of them. I mean, nobody ever mentions the word Cambridge. Oh, it's Cambridge. 30% of journeys are made actively every day. Oh, yeah, but that's Cambridge. You've got Waltham Forest in London, the most recent example, just a few years ago, through huge turmoil, changed to a people-centred neighbourhood. Massive effect. I think 4% of people actually want to put it back to as it was before now. 90% reduction in pollution on roads. And so we have the examples, but my job is to try and communicate them and change the language of having something taken away to actually giving something back. Your kids have the freedom to use the streets again, and you feel able to let them. So again, I'm not sure if that answered the question, Anthony, but
answered
closer,
it perfectly. That was the best answer I could have got. How about what's your experience been of the last few years, but now in Active Travel England, working in a kind of political environment? Now, do you enjoy working in a political environment, or do you just find it endlessly annoying? It's not at all loaded.
I think I have really enjoyed it. I mean, the Department for Transport, whether it likes it or not, has now become a vehicle for culture change. And that's really scary because it is a body that moves steadily for a reason. So people can't do silly things, and it's very hard to make a mistake. And suddenly we've got to do things quickly. And that's really hard to do to make that transition. And I think and I can see a lot of good people wrestling with that. How do we do it? How do we take these monolithic, well-established processes that we put in place and now make them be quick and innovative? And that's hard. And I think I hope it's one of the things I hope Active Travel England can help with. It gives a way to try different. It's different, but it's the right level of different, and a way to try problem solving at reasonably large scale. We've got 2 billion allocated to this topic in this Parliament, and then things we learn there can be used elsewhere. But I found the appetite for that is there, and I think there's a lot of people that want to enable it, because it's even if people don't like riding bicycles, and I've said this to a few politicians, if you look at all of the problems we face, it is your least shit option. And I think we should have a T-shirt that says that cycling is your least shit option, because it's so big, the problems that we have, that these simple solutions could help us address all of the things that we are obliged to do. And it is the cheapest, the quickest. We've got 8 years. We've got 8 years of 1.5 degrees. Buses and bikes are the only tools available to us that can go that quickly. And things like buses don't work unless we make space, and suddenly it's back in your lap of something that we have to solve. So the appetite for change is there, but it's very, very different. And I've been involved with R&D for the last 15 years, and this is the bit I love. So you see a problem and you think, great, how do we work with that? And we know there was a couple of projects we're on. How do we get around that? Yeah, it's fun, and ultimately we've got to succeed, because what's the alternative?
Indeed. So you can take away from this two things: that the Olympic gold medalist and Tour de France stage-winning cyclist said, "Cycling is lazy walking." So I have colleagues who went on a trip with Chris to Copenhagen, and none of them could keep up with him. So I'd hate to see him walking. That's all I can say. So, Sarah, can I just pick up on the kind of political angle? Because a lot of what you talked about is in your role as Chief Scientific Advisor, which is quite an unusual kind of role in government. What's your kind of experience been of the last few months of stepping into the political world, where compromise and ambiguity is a kind of daily challenge?
It's been really, really interesting to me, actually, joining a government department. And I sort of partly knew what I was getting into, but also didn't know what I was getting into. So the first thing is that I've actually been really impressed by the approach of the ministers that I deal with to my role and to the department in general. So one of the things I think our ministers in the department are very good at is asking difficult questions. And that's their job, and that's really, really helpful. They will very quickly, I think, be in the mindset of what do the other ministers or politicians, what questions are they going to ask me? And then also, what's my responsibility in terms of representation of the public view? So one of the things that I think I'm still honing is the anticipation of the questions the ministers will ask me. Because one of the reasons that the job of the Chief Scientific Advisor was created was that I describe myself as speaking with the department. I don't think it's appropriate to describe myself as speaking to the department, because that sounds a bit combative, and I think my job is to help as well. But I am allowed to disagree with the department. And actually, I think you are as well, Chris, in your role. And we need people to provide that active, independent challenge to the department, but also understand the constraints and the context of the department, because it's not really very helpful to just go, oh, that's wrong, that's wrong. You need to understand, as you were talking about, Chris, the context, the reason why these processes that might seem laborious or might seem onerous they're there for good reasons. So thinking about how to work around that, but also accelerate the implementation of technology is really, really important. But I quite enjoy the independence of the role. And the other thing, of course, I get to do is I get to work with the other chief scientific advisors across government. And that group of chief scientific advisors has been described as one of the most effective cross-government bodies, because we're all independent. So we can literally pick up the phone and say, what's going on here? How do we get around this? And try and sort of cut across some of the internal processes that are there for good reasons, but do sometimes slow things down. I really enjoy it keeps you on your toes, actually. You never quite know what a minister's going to ask you. And I'm sometimes caught out, but it's actually really, really reassuring, to be honest, to see the way that the ministers and as well as my policy colleagues have approached some of the very difficult challenges that we have facing us.
And Chris, if I could just, I haven't forgotten about you, Paula, don't worry, I'm coming for you in a moment. Just on this thing about, you've come into the departments, you've seen the, sorry, I keep standing in front of your light. Is that better? Because then you're not dazzled.
Being interrogated.
Yeah. Wait till they ask you questions. So you've got the kind of the frustrations of dealing with central government and all its sort of weird internal processes. But obviously, a lot of your role is actually looking out to local authorities, because a bit like everyone in my team, we don't actually do much ourselves. We're facilitating and supporting other people actually doing the doing, because it's actually in road transport, it's largely it's the local authorities doing things. So what's your kind of message for the kind of local authority world in terms of what you're looking for from them, and what can you bring to them?
Yeah, well, I haven't been getting out much in the last few months because it's been internally focused to find directors and a CEO and set up a board, and that's we're nearly there with that now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've been doing is making sure that people that we have employed and are employing come from local authorities and know what it's like, and they know how it works, and they know the problems in the way. So the experience I mentioned in Greater Manchester, when you actually go right down to the coalface and, low traffic neighbourhood, reducing traffic around homes is a controversial thing, is incredible that we've let it become that. But ultimately, it's real, and that's the hardest bit of change to make with our streetscape, because it's personal. And that local councillor who might have a 2-vote majority has got somebody screaming in his face about removing a parking space, and their job is to represent that person, so they don't feel they can do it. And then you scale that up for a country, and that local councillor in that position has been put in charge of climate change, and that's not fair. So I see that, and I have to start from a position of your problem is my problem. So how do we help you with that? And a lot of it is the communication and how do we get different. I'm a big fan of trials done properly for a meaningful amount of time, because people are scared of change. We're all scared of change because it's the unknown, and that's how we're built instinctively well, if we change that, it could mean there'll be less customers in my shop or whatever it might be. And it actually came from New York, where they put in a significant cycle lane. They went into all the shops and just said, actually, we want to do this. I know you're supportive, but you don't want to do it because it could affect your custom. We'll put it in for 6 months, and if you don't like it, we'll take it out. And that gave everybody the courage to take a step. And so seeing tools like that are necessary, and taking that information and things that worked in Greater Manchester and things that have worked in Newcastle, and bringing that back and giving people the way to do it. But locally, there's 2 things that are needed. First of all, it's a big plan. So Greater Manchester, we had the B network, a 1,000 mile network. It was a picture that I could put up here and people can see it. And it was something that people regionally could feel proud about. This is ours, we're doing this thing. And then when you go and have to have a fight for a small change, you could see where it fits in the big picture. And that helps everybody to be able to convey the message. And the second one is have a vision. What outcome do you actually want? Because we stop sometimes, we're running along, and nobody goes, hang on, which way are we going? Is this getting us closer or further away? Start with the outcome that you want, and it's something we've been really bad at. Start with the outcome you want. What do we need to achieve that? What do people need to see out of a car window to do things differently? How do we get those things? So I think, and I hope I can help with that. And the messaging and how we talk to each other is probably the most important thing. Outcomes we all want.
It's your moment, Paula. Here it comes. So it was interesting listening to what Sarah was describing, this huge array of deep scientific progress and innovation and technology. Chris and his £2 billion war chest going to transform active travel, but it requires local authorities to do stuff. So kind of how does it feel from where you're sitting? Because you're obviously part of your role is kind of facilitating and supporting local authorities to get this stuff done.
Well, it's really interesting because actually, Chris, I stood for local election in Walthamstow, and I can tell you that when you are faced with knocking on doors and listening to the sort of the issues that are really affecting in a local authority area, it might be things about litter, it might be about getting your children to a play area, but there are people who are just as passionate about how I get my children safely to schools. So, I just want to sort of say, absolutely, you're right, there is a communication message. But also, I think for me, that piece about local government having a real key part to play often the role that politicians and officers have together to try and encourage that change that feels like a safe sort of change, because no elected member or officer wants to be left with a legacy of something that, and communities have a very, very long memory. If something goes wrong, then you want to make sure that you've involved them in the journey along the way, but also from a local authority perspective, you've actually taken the steps to take the journey with you. I was describing it yesterday as being a bit like a chess game. You know you want to get to the other side of the board, but actually each piece of the chess moves in a different way. And that's exactly as you're saying, Chris. It's different parts of what local government does, different parts of these technologies that all make up the sum of the whole. And that's the really, really important thing for local government. That big change, you can have that vision and you can help. But if you communicate that too big and too wide for communities, that is very, very scary. I never forget the woman I was speaking to, as eventually nearly a prospective parliamentary candidate, that she wasn't interested in the big picture stuff. She was interested in how do I use that playground safely? But actually she was interested in the big stuff. It was the way you communicated. And that's why officers and elected members and how we encourage technology to not be scary is going to be really, really important.
The life of local government is an arduous one. I think I recognise that absolutely. Right, okay, we've got a few more minutes left, and as Chris is obviously tired of my interrogation, why don't we? There's some roving mics out there, so if anybody out there has any observations, questions, comments they'd like to make, now is absolutely your moment. So, hands. There's a hand there. I want a microphone as well.
Yeah,
Well organised.
Already, very quick. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really interesting. Kind of touching on Paula's point, I think there's a piece around the culture of failures and when things go wrong. So it'd be interesting to hear from the panel, how do we get that culture shift that failing is okay, as long as we try and learn from it and kind of educate people that, it's part of the journey to pushing the envelope and getting that culture change. Thanks.
I happen to have the microphone, so I'll make a very brief sort of comment. So one of the examples I gave was from HS2 Innovation. And my colleague at HS2, someone called Howard Mitchell, I've got huge admiration for, because he has absolutely explicitly embedded a culture of failure in the innovation programs that he is delivering and supporting. And he uses actually a sort of 10-to-1 type assumption that of the 10 projects that he supports, one will be the one that delivers the absolute transformation in terms of return on investment, so 100-to-1 type return on investment. Others won't necessarily deliver that type of return on investment, but you still learn. So actually, it's a really uncomfortable message for politicians to feel that they've put money into something that hasn't necessarily yielded a successful outcome. So I think that, first of all, being really honest that if we are innovating, we do not expect everything to succeed is really important. But I think also capturing the implicit learning that we get. So even if the low traffic neighbourhood that's been implemented hasn't succeeded in every single metric that we set at the beginning, what have we learned? What has it succeeded in? I do think sometimes we tie ourselves up in knots in setting what we anticipate the outcome to be at the beginning. And I think that it's really important that as we are observing the implementation of technology, we learn about the things that are emerging as the technology implementation takes place. So, and make sure that whilst it might look officially like failure because what we set out at the beginning to achieve, we haven't necessarily achieved to the full extent, we have learned and succeeded along the way. One final point is that it's really important as a department that we also take our responsibility very seriously to encourage innovation and support small and medium-sized enterprises. And many small and medium-sized enterprises really, really value some of the very small grants that we give out in various different schemes across the department and in partnership with Innovate UK. And sometimes the role of those schemes is not only to develop that specific technology, but also to keep those entrepreneurs in business, because we need those entrepreneurs to have the ideas and to have the ability to innovate, to then implement in the wider context.
Chris, could I just ask you to comment on the kind of dare to fail kind of issue? Because obviously with something like low traffic neighbourhoods, as you touched on, they're tricky. What's your view
Yeah,
of that gonna be?
I touched on it, I think, with when I mentioned New York, really, and that gives you permission to fail. If you say, "Listen, we're going to," and a trial for me is not as soon as somebody doesn't like it, it goes. It says, "No, we're going to do this. We're going to commit to it. We're going to listen. If we need to tweak along the way, we will, but we'll leave it for a meaningful amount of time to get the information that we need." So I think trials and piloting, the framing of it at the start, is really important. And it's a piece of learning, and everybody's scared of failure, and I think we should be. I think that's very healthy, but not just, trying to not fail is the perfect way to failure. I mentioned the R&D program that I ran, and I think we failed on about 90% of stuff, but the 10% of stuff won 8 gold medals and improved performance by 6%. But everybody just saw that bit and hands in the air and didn't see all the stuff that we didn't do. And that's really important. But I think the communication bit right at the start is, listen, we're not sure if this is going to work. We think it will. Here's why we think it will. We're going to try it. And framing it in the first place so everybody knows what they're getting into. And just to double back to the to what you mentioned locally, what I failed to say was with the Bee Network, one of the reasons that was successful is we never touched a pen. We gave it to the local communities, and that also meant that it's their learning. Doubling back to this point, is that it was the communities who said, "This is where I want to go. This is what we want to do," and they figuratively, literally held the pen, and so it belongs to them, and that ownership is really important, particularly if it's something that's a bit risky.
Yeah, and that maybe perhaps hasn't been enough of the tradition that we've seen in this country. Maybe people feel too much they're being done to, and therefore they're going to resist it almost, by default. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, Paul. Microphone's coming.
Hi. Yeah. Much as we all want to encourage active travel, and I think to make that space would be great, but in a lot of cases, particularly in like a densely populated city like Portsmouth, what we've actually got to do is take that space, and that means taking it away from someone else who really wanted to use it, and that's difficult politically, because I think it was touched on that it's that councillor that's trying to win those votes, and someone saying, "You've just taken away my parking space. You've actually made it more difficult for me to drive to the shop, to put these active travel things in." And we're grappling at the moment with trying to spend money to improve active travel. Really difficult. We've got the right strategies in place, but when you go to actually implement those local projects, councillors are like, "Ooh, I'm a bit nervous about that," or "Actually, I don't really want to do that." And we find it watered down, and it's very difficult to put the projects in place to deliver against the key strategies.
Unless you want to go. Right, okay. So a political will and fear of change. The first thing I did in Greater Manchester was tot up what it cost to travel as it is now. And it was 3.75 billion a year. It was costing to travel as we are now. And people went, "Really? 3.2?" Yeah, it's like 800 million on collisions, and it went through all the various different costs and the health costs. Actually, and we put it all together, 3.75 billion. Can you afford that? So contexted it with the audience at the time, which was the local leaders, in things that are their burning fires. Can you afford that? To make sure that when we get to, okay, if we don't do this, what are the consequences of that? Because doing nothing also is a choice in itself, and it has consequences. And that helps people go, okay, all right, so we're going to have to do this. And that helps a little bit with the courage. Don't do everything at once, but do things properly. So when you were talking about watering down, that's really dangerous. I know that one of the councils in Manchester, Greater Manchester, were worried about low traffic neighbourhoods. So they go, okay, well, we won't do that bit, we won't do that. And they basically set it up to fail. And I think one of the choices that helped get people over the line was the choice to do nothing. But we said we're not funding it if we don't do it properly, because it's a waste of public money. If you don't want to do it, that's absolutely fine. And that really changed it for people. And local politicians sort of went, "Oh, okay, we do want to do something." And then it turned to, how do we do it? and then it was our issue. But the choice to do nothing had to be a real one. But we wouldn't fund it. And we also published how people were doing on an annual basis. And for people who are just too scared to do anything, suddenly that threat became bigger than actually doing something. So it's a bit messy, but it all seems to come back to choice. But it's not easy. I got asked in the Isle of Man, I went over there to look at their infrastructure a few weeks ago. Somebody stood up in a similar audience and said, when does it get less noisy? And I said, it doesn't. It doesn't. You know, this is culture change, and it's personal, and it's people won't thank you, even if it's great 4 years later. They won't come back. It's going to be like that. And the person who asked the question was expecting me to explain to them why it's going to get easier. But once it had been, here it is out on the table, it's not. It's going to be difficult. Okay. And then we went forward and had a discussion about how to deal with difficult, which was a slightly different thing. So I'm not sure that wholly answers your question, but I would do it in chunks, do it properly. Consultation is absolutely everything. The final point was that 70% of people consistently support the change. And if you frame it as, you know, your kids, do you want your kids to be able to walk to school? What would you need to do that? Would you support these measures to enable it? If it's framed properly, 70% of people support. The 30% can be really, really noisy. I think it was 47% in Waltham Forest at one point. It was really noisy. Coffins on shoulders, this is the death of the high street. But then that went to 4% later on. But somebody had to have the political courage to get through that first bit, knowing that on the other side, it would be a nicer place to live.
Thank you. Yep, I see a hand up at the back. Microphone's arriving.
Hi, it's Sanal Budaya from Coventry City Council. It's a general question to the panel. When we're doing, and Coventry have been involved in some very innovative projects, with the latest one being the world's first urban airport catering for the drones. But working through that project over the past year, we've found that there's a lot of legislations that are in place currently, which doesn't allow us to progress any further. It's a question to the panel. How do we tackle that? Because once we've done the innovation, we're ready to roll that out, because that acceptance, while you've done the demonstration, you've done the innovation, the public acceptance, as you've just said, becomes quite high on the agenda. But by the time the legislations have changed or we've got into the position to roll it out, the impetus is lost. So it's just an open question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've definitely done an awful lot of learning about since joining the department. And I don't know, Anthony, whether this might be one that you might want to sort of comment on as well. I know you're supposed to be chairing,
Maybe.
but you probably know more about this than me. I think that one of the things that actually I've been really impressed with since joining the department is the willingness of some of our regulatory authorities. So if we talk about drones, the Civil Aviation Authority, actually they really are trying to grip some of the issues associated with drones, particularly outside line of sight control, which is the sort of next big question. Yes, it is complicated. It's actually really important not to rush legislation in that sort of area, because getting legislation wrong can be much more harmful than taking a little bit of time. But I think the appetite is there to move things as quickly as possible. What is a barrier is capacity. These are very, very busy parts of the transport system that have an awful lot of pressure from an awful lot of players within the sector. So I think that there's a job for many of us in the room to think about what advice and what guidance we can give to then work with organisations like the Civil Aviation Authority to move things along. One of the things that I have seen used successfully, though, are the use of trials to test some of these considerations. So actually the Solent trial that I talked about is one that's working very, very closely with the regulators to understand what might be needed in this sort of context, and then hopefully have that strong use case that can give those who need to sign off the legislation the confidence that it's the right thing to do. But it is tricky. But I don't know, Anthony, if you've got a view.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you're right about the drone trial. I mean, it's been really interesting that essentially some of the innovation there has actually been about innovative regulation. because we're actually regulating for something that really hasn't been done before. And you travel around the world, everyone else is struggling with the same thing, and it's not easy to do because you have to provide for every eventuality. And in the case of transport, most of the time, the first and foremost thing you're trying to do is make sure that no one's killed or injured as a result of anything you do, and therefore you've got to be absolutely sure you've got it right, which is why government takes a long time to do things. I think the issue with roads and highways is that they've been around a long time. So unfortunately, we are kind of hobbled by, a couple of centuries of legislation. And, if in an ideal world, we would probably just start again because, the space is really largely the same as it has been for a very long time in cities. It hasn't really fundamentally changed, the amount of space. What it's used for is getting more and more and more sophisticated, and technology can make it even more sophisticated, and legislation struggles to keep up with that, and that is a real challenge. But I do think it's definitely part of the mix. There's no point in thinking that we can somehow get around that through technology. You've got to kind of make the rules work as well, because that's what the public expects. They expect things to be done properly. But it's not easy, and it takes a long time to write legislation and to get it through Parliament. So as we're about to find out, because one of the things I'm responsible for is micromobility, so getting legislation for e-scooters is going to be an interesting run through the swamp over the next kind of year or so. One thing I would say, of course, is that it's really important that people who know about stuff tell us what they think. When we go out to consult, what we get back is absolutely vital in kind of informing the decisions that we make, because we're a small number of people. We don't know everything at all. As Paula was saying, talking about earlier, there's the reality on the ground. That's the operational side of it, and there's no point in us writing legislation in our kind of ivory tower thinking, well, this is going to work because this is what rational people do. Most people aren't that rational, actually, when it comes down to transport delivery. Most of the things we're talking about in terms of low traffic neighbourhoods or whatever, you can make a rational argument, but so what? People aren't listening to the rational argument, they're listening to the kind of emotional argument, and that's much, much harder. So anyway, that was an even more rambling answer than anybody. So, right, I think I've been pointed at several times already in the last couple of minutes, so I think we're at the end of the long and winding road. So can I ask you to thank our panellists, Chris, Sarah and Paula.